going to Italy, which is a really important part of our story. We were going back to interview a director named Claudio Fragasso, who was the director of the original movie, which my movie is about, a film called Troll 2. You know, I just said, well, Claudio, I said, you know, let me take you out to dinner tomorrow night. And before going, I thought, you know, because I knew Claudio, I worked with him as a kid, and I knew his behavior somewhat. So I thought, you know, I need to make sure I have plenty of money. So I pulled out $500. There's, you know, there's no way we'll spend this for, you know, for dinner tonight. Get to the table, and I sit down, and it's, you know, folded linens, everything really nice. And not only is it Claudio, but there's like 10 of his friends. And his family, and, you know, and I'm just sitting there thinking, I am screwed. And I started looking at each person and kind of adding up in my head and looking at the menu and saying, I do not have this money. So I faked like I had a phone call, stood up from the table, kind of, you know, moseyed out of the restaurant. And as soon as I was out of sight, I just started running across Rome, just trying to find an ATM. And I ended up running 2 or 3 miles. Finally, you know, the first ATM, it wouldn't work. You know, it was a bankomat is what they're called over there. It wouldn't work. Run to the next ATM, and I pull out another like 500 euros, 600 euros. I'm like, there's no way we're gonna, you know, this will pay for the dinner, and everything will be fine. I'll get the interview that I need, and everybody will be happy. And so you know, about an hour later, I come back to the dinner, and I'm sweaty, and I'm just totally a mess. And, you know, there's like carnage across the table, and there's bottles of champagne that are like, you know, 3/4 full, and there was a little Italian band playing for the table, and I sit down, and I'm just like, man, this you know, really didn't want to eat, and then here came the check. The guy comes out with, you know, this really nice kind of tuxedoed guy, and he goes to Claudio, the director, and Claudio looks at me and just points to me like this. And I stand up, and I go around, and I get the bill, and I open it up, and it's 1,500 euros. And here I had about 1,000 euros, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And I didn't want to cause this big. Everybody was happy having the time of their life except for me. And Claudio came up. I think he'd sensed that I was nervous, and he just looked at me, and he said, you don't have the money? And I said, no, Claudio, this is more than I planned on spending for this dinner. And I had another credit card that in my mind I knew had about, you know, $700-800. So I said, look, I can pay for I'll pay for the dinner, but I can't afford the tip. And so it's like, oh, you know, kind of begrudgingly said, you know, he'd pay for the tip, and then everybody was happy. So it was kind of one of those things where, had I known going into it, been a little bit more prepared, I probably could have set more of an expectation on what I thought meant buying dinner for him meant. And there's a lot of times when you're a filmmaker, and especially a young filmmaker, first film, and probably, you know, the same for you guys who have more experience, but there are many opportunities where people can take advantage of you, and it's hard to see them coming. And fortunately, it all worked out in the end, and I got one of the best interviews that I was able to get for the film, so it was all worth it. But it was one of those times where I was very stressed about finance.
The film Winnebago Man that I made starred a subject who was known for being a holy terror, right? And so I wanted that from him, and I expected it a little bit. But what I actually ended up getting in the footage was way worse than what you see in the movie. Part of what happened, he's a viral video celebrity, so to speak, but he doesn't know that he's a celebrity because he's been living as a hermit on top of a mountain in a little clapboard shack for the last 15 years. And he's terrifyingly angry most of the time. So we're on top of a mountain, we're in an unheated clapboard shack, and I'm getting yelled at for about 10 hours a day. And I remember, and we stayed up there for 5 days, and I took my business partner and cameraman, Barrett Mader, with me, who's like the nicest guy you've ever met. And after the first day of just getting screamed, I mean, and it's like, that's a terrible story, like having to pay almost $3,000 for dinner. But I might rather be in that position than like, it was kind of like I would say, so Jack, tell us about your early days as a reporter, and there'd be this pause, and he'd just kind of go, Ben, I sometimes wonder if you think before you speak, Ben. And then it would just be berating me for 15 minutes, and he wouldn't answer the question. And so by the end of the first day, of this 8-hour day, I look over, and Barrett is just like pale as a sheet, and he's like a little sweaty, and he's kind of shaky, and we're just getting shouted at, and we're packing the gear up, and we're driving down the mountain that first day back to the hotel, and he looks over at me, and he's like, man, we can go home. We don't have to stay here anymore. We can just leave. Let's just get on a plane and go back home. And every day that happened, every car ride down the mountain was like that. He'd be like, we can get out of here. We don't have to be here. And we didn't leave, and I'm really glad that we didn't leave, because like putting ourselves through that and sort of gaining his trust, so to speak, or whatever, is kind of made the movie in a way. But it was terrifying, and it was an awful, awful experience.
You know, you really, because you can't let anything stop you, and you start to realize where your priorities are and become horrified by yourself. And the one I remember when I was shooting my first film, Funny Haha, we started working with I was shooting film, and we were working with a lab in Pittsburgh, and the day after we sent them our first dailies, the lab went bankrupt, and so we had all of our first day's work there, and you know, I started to. I think I talked to people. I think I probably got on the phone with my dad or something. I was like, "Hey, Dad, what happens when people go bankrupt?" He's like, "Well, sometimes like the sheriff comes and padlocks the place so that nobody can get anything out until, you know, all the finances have been settled." And I thought, this is not good. And the lab was in Pittsburgh. I had one friend in Pittsburgh. I called her up and I said, "Can you do me a huge favor? Can you go down to this address and get our film out of there, and don't take no for an answer?" And so meanwhile, you know, we're in the middle of production, all the stresses of production, a million other things to worry about. We go on to our second day of shooting. At some point, there's a minute during the day when I have a moment, I call up Rachel and I say, "Rachel, were you able to do that?" And she says, "Well, I was riding down there on my bike and I had an accident and I broke my jaw." And this is the moment where you realize what you've become, because you're like, "So when can you get down there?" And she was very cool, you know. As soon as she could like move, she went down there and she got our film, and she's a true hero. But I learned something about what it means to be a filmmaker that day, and it wasn't nice.